One of the most unexpected goals I had this year, this 2024, was actually learning how to read. At the age of 24, after college and high school and everything, I only started to appreciate literature. Believe it or not, prior to this year, the only book that I've intentionally read from front to end was Hunger Games 1, 2, and 3. And that was from elementary until end of college. I did not crave reading. I was very big into film and music. I like the idea of being seen, of being heard, of resonating with people on a screen, but I've never really gave reading a fair shot, especially when I was undiagnosed with ADHD for the longest time. This year, I met someone who introduced me to a really good book that made me feel like, gosh, I feel so seen, I feel so understood, and that was actually Myth of the Normal by Gabor Mate. Non-fiction, but it made me understand myself more. And so from there, I spiraled into a literary paralysis where now I'm trying to read on all of the books that I've missed out on for the longest time. For anybody diagnosed or suspected to have ADHD, you know how hard it is to focus on a single piece of work. You would be reading a certain page, then you would come across a very specific keyword that's going to trigger your thoughts, and you're gonna be like, oh, I remember this word that was related to this story, and I remember the time where I did this, and I was so embarrassed about that time, and you start to ruminate, and you're just like... Or sometimes you would be reading words, you can read the words, you're saying it out loud in your head, but nothing's registering, and that happens a lot because you're thinking about other things and you're not very present in the text. Let me show you how I learned how to read even with ADHD. So basically, when I told my best friend I wanted to start reading classic literature and more books, the first book she recommended me was Notes from the Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And for those who are aware with classic literature, Dostoevsky is very hard to understand, but this would be one of his easiest books because he doesn't have a lot of characters in it. And I think I only finished 50% of it, and I realized that I did not understand a lot of what he was saying. I had to read back the chapters to try and see the context and where he was coming from, and I had a lot of guide with spark notes. And I also told her one of the hardest things for me was imagining the scenario. So the author would be painting the scene, describing the place he lived, the places he walked really well, but I just couldn't imagine it. Like, she asked me, imagine an apple on a table, what do you see? And I see a 2D apple on a table, just black and white, like a doodle, like a sketch. But she was like, oh, you don't see the way the light hits the apple or maybe the texture of the wood? And I was like, no, that's challenging for me. Because I just never really got into building my own world through words. I would be able to imagine how films are made, and I would be able to direct scenes. And in high school, I made a lot of short films about life, things I've already experienced, things I've already seen for myself. So the first thing she told me is, let's read something light. So she introduced to me reading Harry Potter. I never really came across the franchise until I was 18 years old because I grew up in a Christian family and I actually really enjoyed it. So I'm currently in the Goblet of Fire and I'm taking my time reading this entire series. I talked to my friends about it who read Harry Potter when they were younger, and they said it took them a month to finish the whole series. But for me, it's taking much longer, mostly because I rotate my books. Because this is one of the tricks that I learned to help with my ADHD. I'll talk more about that later, but going back, Harry Potter was the one that taught me how to imagine because I had a good basis with the films. I could translate and connect certain scenes from the book to what I saw in the movies, and that's what helped me practice my imagination. And when there were scenes that were in the book and not in the movie series, I would be able to make it up because I had something to work off of. From there, I started building slowly to other things, and I started slowly reading the more complicated texts like The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I tried to read a lot of Dostoevsky because I'm at this phase in my life that's questioning my spirituality a lot, and if you're one of them, let me know because I want to meet more of you guys. And the other thing that I super love reading, actually, that I just naturally gravitate to are actually non-fiction books. So those are psych books, political books, history books, because I'm just a very curious person, and I also really love philosophy. And I love also neuroscience and psychology. So that's why The Myth of the Normal got me into this reading binge throughout the entire year, and I'm currently reading now Behave by Robert Sapolsky, who is a neuroscientist that explains how the brain works in a very, very digestible manner. Okay, so once you get used to imagining and learning how to build your own world and learning how to be immersed in it, and you also learn how to put the proper protocols in place for when your brain isn't ready so you don't force yourself to read, you now set up a rotation of books. And this is my current rotation of books. Big stack. I read this all at the same time because this is the only way to get me motivated to keep reading a habit, a daily habit. I like to keep options. I have Harry Potter for evening reading. I need something light. I need something peaceful and fictional because I also suffer from PTSD, and this is what helps me not get nightmares at night. This has been a very comforting series for me. During the day when I start, I always love learning new things. So I like to read Behave by Sapolsky or any other psych books. I have a list in my TBR, but yes, any psych book. And then during the middle of the day, or when I'm ready to digest something harder or to go into more complex texts, I like to read political books. So I'm currently reading Noam Chomsky. I have a lot of Chomsky books, but this is what I'm currently reading on anarchism. And I'm also reading The Brothers Karamazov. This is like what I would normally read at 3 or 4 p.m. in the day. So there's this sleep doctor who said that brains are most optimal in the afternoon. And surprisingly, a lot of athletes actually take advantage of our brain being optimal at this time. So you want to read the most complex texts at this hour of the day because that's when you have the most patience and also brain strength and brain capacity to go through these heavy texts. Your brain just warms up to things that you're familiar with and that you're very excited to learn, like these things. And so when you're approaching more complicated texts throughout the day, you get to things like these. One of the things that I had to learn as I was starting to read was to be patient with myself. Sometimes I had to reread chapters in Harry Potter, even if it's a children's book. I still had a hard time at first because really I was working from ground zero here. I had to give myself patience and grace and be like, okay, let me reread this chapter, and if I don't understand anything, I have to learn how to give myself a break, do something else. Most likely with my hands, I would either paint, I would do polymer clay sculptures because I love crafting, or I would bake cookies and sugar cookies and do all of that. So that's what I would normally do. If I had the energy to go back to books, I would not force myself to pick up the same book that I finished on. I would really give myself a rotation or the freedom to choose what I wanted to read at that moment. I think that's what really helped me get to my goal of reading 1 to 2 books every month for the whole of 2024. Another thing that was actually really hard for me as I started to learn how to read and enjoy this world of literature, learning how to put down books. Because I felt like I was deprived of the world of literature for so long, I wanted to actually read 4 books every month. And I think for the first 2 months I tried, but I failed because I realized that it became more of a chore than it became a hobby for personal nourishment. And so there were books that I had to say, no, I'm not ready to read at this time. I'm still reading all of these classic books or other pieces of literature so that I'm able to build the endurance I need to be able to finish such big books. I think you can get the fulfillment of finishing a book but not understanding most of it when you're not ready to read a piece of literature, because you give yourself the grace that you were at least able to finish that book. But then sometimes you need to learn how to step back and go to easier books. Like, it's the same logic, I guess, that goes with weight training. Before you increase another plate, you need to be able to do in high reps the lighter weights so that you can build muscle properly without injuring yourself. And in this case, injuring yourself would be building a disinterest towards reading. Another thing that helped me a lot with ADHD is giving myself the option of audiobooks. When you have ADHD, it's so hard to stay put. you have so much energy pent up in you throughout the day. And so sometimes you need to go for a walk or you need a change of scenery. It's practically impossible to just walk and read at the same time. It also got the brain working, your serotonin is working in your brain, so you get better focus, and at the same time you get exercise in to help with your dopamine levels. So it's a win-win situation. So yes to audiobooks. So the only audiobook that I'm listening to right now is the Harry Potter series. Everything else I like to sit down and highlight and annotate. But since Harry Potter is what they consider a fairly easier read, it's something that's easier to digest through listening. And because it is a famous series, there are so many audiobooks already available online for you to choose from, and a lot of them are also free, so it's the most accessible one. Another audiobook that I love listening to at night is actually The Little Prince. This is one of my most favorite reads. Perfect brain break for you in case you're stuck in traffic. It's actually the same length as a drive from my work to my house during rush hour. It's like 2.5 hours long. I forgot another thing to help me with reading is to find an accountability buddy. Not someone to make sure that you finish your reading, but someone to help you enjoy the piece. And for me, that was my best friend. She has helped me a lot tremendously, guiding me and making sure that I understand the text right during its own time, while also being able to help me have a conversation partner so I can build my own opinions on characters and events. Such big help as well, deciding what book I need to read next, because she knows what the next step would be if I want something more challenging, if I want something more relaxing, if I want something towards spirituality or something towards, let's say, morality or philosophy. Having somebody to talk about your newfound love or hobbies or reading interests is such a great way to keep your brain excited to read. And I think that's the best way to leverage using your ADHD to help you accomplish your reading goals. And my last advice for anyone with ADHD who's learning how to read for the first time and trying to dive into the world of literature would be to give yourself grace. I have to realize that my brain is wired differently. That becomes a superpower and also a weakness. I think it's a superpower because what I have in common with all my friends with ADHD is we all have a roster of books to choose from, because we need to keep our interest at peak to keep this daily habit in check. And if not, we get bored with the book. Once we get bored with the book, we abandon reading completely. These are small little tips that I garnered throughout this year that really helped me build a love for reading and really challenge myself. And I just wanted to make this video in case you guys are starting to plan your New Year's resolution but don't know where to start, and some reminders as well. If you just started learning how to read, these are some of my experiences that made it so hard for me to get into reading. All of these experiences and struggles are very valid. It doesn't make you stupid. It doesn't make you less of a human. It doesn't make you slow. We just have differently wired brains, and we have a chance to leverage on certain weaknesses and turn them into strengths. And that's, for us, the ability to use excitement as focus. Okay, so that's all for this video, and I'll see you guys very soon.